David.
Okay, this is an investigation into communication, applying higher education study skills to reflect on my own communication within the workplace. The aims of this will be to find the best ways to examine my own communication in the workplace, how to evaluate a current example that's relevant, to be able to look at the key strengths and weaknesses of my own communication, and hopefully have an outcome to improve, perhaps prevent like a failure to communicate in a future example or situation. So communication happens everywhere in the workplace. You'll be expected to communicate with your colleagues, customers, clients, different departments. There's obviously a lot of situations where this is important. Some examples within the workplace could be an interview to get the job in the first place. Obviously, communication is a big part of that. Clear instructions. Failure in communication can lead to mistakes, budget costs, things like that. So it's obvious that it's a good idea to look into being able to prevent that in the first place. Resolving conflict. Obviously, again, it's all to do with productivity, and obviously you're probably not likely to get hired again if you fail to work as a team. And that leads on to the point of teamwork. So, at first glance, my own opinion of my strengths and weaknesses. My vocabulary, whilst it's not obviously the best vocabulary in the world, I'd say it's advanced enough for me to be able to describe in the way that I feel I want to put across a point, especially in written words. It does have some room for development in public speaking as of now. Ability to negotiate also ties in with teamwork in the way that I'm willing to discuss everybody's opinion, and I don't have a problem with kind of stepping back and having my own views, the quantity of my own views within the work being reduced, provided that there's a fair argument and reasonable points are made with it. In terms of weaknesses, being meticulous is something that I think is a problem with me. It can be a strength, but I'd say mostly it's a problem, and that's the kind of thing I'd like to look at first. It can lead to delays, me wanting to do too much on one piece of work, not being able to identify when enough's enough, which also leads into following instructions if left on my own. Being too meticulous, do I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, or do I want to keep asking lots of little questions about what I've been told? I like to know the specifics, and that can lead to me spending a lot of time kind of going over the same subject. So what kind of different ways can I reflect on my communication? Questionnaires are an option. The thing I don't like about questionnaires is whilst you can reach a vast amount of people, I may not ask the right questions. Obviously you can put are there any other points you want to add at the end of your questionnaire, but I'd much rather have an open discussion with the opportunity for people to make multiple points that I may have missed myself. Peer feedback in that circumstance is probably the best solution. When I will be self-reflecting as well in my report, but I don't anticipate that I'll cover all the bases. I expect that somebody else will hopefully see something that I haven't, and perhaps where my own objectivity fails, they may be able to be a bit more critical of my communication. So, again, applying these methods in the workplace, questionnaires again for colleagues and having conversations with the peers, conversations being my opted choice alongside my self-reflection. I could have gone for things like having an interview, a bit more of a loosely structured questionnaire, and being verbal, so recording it in transcripts to examine later. Simply observing others and taking notes. Again, with my option, or my decision to use conversations with peers, there may be things that I've missed from that, and it's only my own objectivity included. And recording my own personal experiences, something that I will be incorporating into my personal reflection anyway. And these are all relevant things that you can do in the workplace, and you can also apply to any other situation in terms of communication. So moving on to my reflective report, this will be my example of self-reflection, and the purpose of it will be to highlight the positive and negative areas, to use my personal reflection, and additional methods, which will be my conversation with peers, transcripted, and hopefully to find positive ways to improve. This is where I think my report's going to differ from other people's, is that reflecting doesn't have to be negative, and I'm trying to take an example where there's been a positive outcome in a situation of communication within my working environment, and trying to build a foundation of the positive aspects of my communication whilst considering negatives, to build almost like a guideline for me to be able to apply to act on during other situations. Again, I'll be looking at my meticulousness and seeing if perhaps what I'm perceiving to be positive is in fact my meticulousness or another negative aspect. So I'll be critical of my own opinion of what is positive in this situation. I looked at a number of different models of reflection. Examples like Atkins and Murphy's were a bit too emotional for this. I want the opportunity to be able to step back and just look at the facts, seeing as I'm trying to build this baseline of kind of my positive aspects. The others were fairly, they had more points than Driscoll's. I've highlighted Driscoll's obviously because that's the one I've chosen. I'll be moving on to that and discussing it in more detail momentarily. But the reason why I haven't chosen the others is because whilst they have more points than Driscoll's, there's not a lot of detail within them. It's kind of more open to interpretation. The model I found of Driscoll's, obviously, as everyone knows, it's what, so what, now what. But a slightly earlier version than what other people seem to have looked at has this adaptation where there are more points within this. There are about 6 or 7 points under each word, of which allow me to examine things more critically and in a lot more detail than what I actually found with the other models. Whilst the other models have more questions to start with, this one still includes the modifying future outcomes, the kind of the reaction plan, but I can break it down, which ties into my meticulousness, is that I've got all those questions already there. I've got the steps. There's at least 18 steps that I can follow. I haven't shown them on here because you probably don't want to read through 18 lines of words, but I'm definitely going to be using that one, this version of Driscoll's model. So this is for the topic of discussion now. What I'll be trying to derive is the positive aspects from my decision when shooting the first few shots of my Stone Pillow film. I decided that it would be better to suggest that we remove the scripted lines where the character was supposed to be essentially simulating road rage, and I wasn't satisfied with the quality of the acting. I felt it would be better to negotiate a way for the actor to be more natural and to interpret it in his own way. I knew that I couldn't control exactly how I wanted it to be, so I thought, why not see how it turns out his way, and it will benefit my overall production because it will be more realistic. There are a number of things that I personally derive from this without the application of a reflective model first. Again, I may just be seeing this as a positive situation, but it could be me being so meticulous that I wanted to cover all the bases, and it could have cost more time because we drove around whilst they simply pretended to, well, they ad-libbed essentially, so they didn't have these few lines that we could do in a matter of minutes that were set on the timescale. It didn't cut into my production time, but it was obviously a factor that could have affected it in a more professional environment. It also relates back to my strengths of teamwork, the fact that I was willing to let somebody else take control over the production for a brief time. I negotiated to the point where we both felt comfortable that this was the right thing to do. And I'll hopefully be able to pick this apart in further detail using Driscoll's model and come up with a better solution or a foundation to apply to further situations like this. This is just my bibliography, and now it's open for discussion.
I'm going to come straight in, if I may. I think, firstly, the focus is very, very precise. You definitely need to do, if you've got enough information to recall the stages of the negotiative process,
yes, then
you definitely need to look at Sean. And I think your reflection is going to be in action.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's probably going to be, as I say, a lot of referencing transcribed personal communication that was happening at the time.
Yes.
I think that's the only way, because of the nature of using improvisational techniques rather than an actual hard, robust script. I think that you're going to have to look at Sean in a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to see how you're going to capture that. That is, I feel, going to be the most difficult part of what you're doing.
For my personal reflection on the situation, I want to have a loosely transcripted discussion with my colleague about to record basically how we remember the structure of the conversation going, and applying Driscoll's model to that. So we'll follow it through and say, how did you feel about that as well? But when it comes to discussing it, I will be focusing on my own behaviour. But that's just to obviously break down what the conversation was. And then when coming to it a second time for the peer discussion, I want to then bring in his opinion to then compare to see what the conclusions I made from picking apart our discussion.
Is Driscoll going to be officious enough to be able to capture retrospective transcripting?
The version with the additional questions that I found, I think, should be appropriate enough.
I mean, is it not going to get a little bit muddy because of you're trying to, what you're essentially doing is you're trying to retrofit a series of conversations that at the time, okay, would have had different linguistical emphasis, if you like, on certain areas of what was happening. Now I'm cautious. I would be very cautious about that, and that the way that is interpreted from a retrospective point of view. I'm just a bit. I know what you're trying to do, and you're very specific in as much as where you're leaning towards. I just think that I'm not. I don't know how. I'm just concerned that you're going to be able to pin it down in the time constraints you have of writing it up.
I think it's really interesting that you are focusing on meticulousness, and the meticulousness has driven you to focus so specifically on something. And there's a danger when you make generalizations from a very, very specific situation as opposed to making generalizations from multiple situations.
Yes.
Yeah? It's when they do a survey on 10 people, it's for the bid, isn't it? Because you cannot take any qualitative data from that.
The error,
It's-
the sample error will
the
be
sample
too,
error is too
large.
large.
Yeah.
I think that's like
There's
a
the
little-
same risk.
like the bit he's chosen. It may be so like focused and like meticulous, but when you look at it as a whole, it's actually quite broad, and you can expand on it quite a bit because it's that situation can be transferred into other situations.
I
Makes
know what you're
sense.
saying, Jez. You're saying that are the outcomes, because the outcomes may be very generic.
Yeah.
Now, if the outcomes are very generic, then it works.
Mm.
I understand what you mean, and that is essentially what any advanced researcher will do. They'll find the tiniest little morsel of detail and say, well, if that's true, then here's a series of logical statements
Once you
to
match it
say
up, they should be the same.
that actually...
But any
generic-
reasonable researcher would put that through its paces.
Mm.
Yes,
and
you would. It
test-
would need testing.
Test
It would need
that on
testing.
other situations. My other slight concern is I'm not sure that meticulousness is the right way to describe it.
Yeah, I think that maybe the term is clumsy.
Is it, or could it be further deep-seated emotional behavior, so fear of failure? Does that make you meticulous in all sorts of different ways?
Yeah.
Or it could be all sorts of things. I'm not 100% sure. It's not something in terms of behavior type.
Meticulousness is the response, and I think the problem is that the term you use
Yeah.
is a little bit languid and clumsy,
Yes.
and I think what you need to do is come up with a term that describes the impetus. Meticulousness is the response, the outcome of,
The symptom.
yeah.
My application of using like meticulous in a circumstance, it wasn't going to be the only focus of the discussion
Right.
around the subject. That's why I wouldn't be covering in massive detail, which would be a problem. I wanted to mainly look at other aspects of it, like obviously my negotiation and my teamwork in that, and kind of the way that I wanted to work with my colleague, and I was willing to, kind of share views.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that you would definitely need to identify, because there was two things that I picked up on. That obviously there is an intrinsic link. I'm going to have to go in a minute then, because I've got a lesson at 11. You might have to assess Helen. Is that all right? There is an intrinsic link between negotiative processing and meticulousness. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that link is. I'd expect you to try and find out what you think that link is.
Yep. I'll have a look.
And the other thing is there's some correlation between, I like the way you presented diagrammatically strengths and weaknesses. I'm not so sure meticulousness, or whatever the term will eventually be, sits neatly within weaknesses.
No, it doesn't.
I think that there may be some interstitial value.
Yeah.
It's kind of what I was suggesting. There's something in between.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said when I presented that part, I know I put it in weaknesses. I knew that it was both, but I wanted to focus on it as a negative aspect because I already had enough positives.
I mean, we are pulling this really apart here. You know, that in no way is a negative criticism about the amount of analysis that you've attempted to do, and what you're trying to do is very worthy. You know, don't take it the wrong way. But
Oh, no,
it's
no.
an important discussion and really valuable, and I've kind of benefited
Yeah.
and learned from that too.
I think, I don't know if 2,500 words is going to be long enough to really unravel it and unpick it. So you're going to have to come up with some definitive term, okay, and you're going to need to define those terms very, very quickly.
Also, when you started or when you ended with introducing teamwork and negotiation and things like that, as soon as you increase that, our essay is going to be huge. So there's nothing wrong with focusing on a particular kind of behaviour. Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, I've got to go, guys. So, Helen.